sharing my screen. And slideshow. Okay. Okay, we have been to Alaska, I think 5 times.
Right, 5 times in the years between 2002 and 2017, so over a 15-year period. And Phil and I started out as bird watchers and really enjoyed nature, so that's why Alaska calls for us.
Okay, first, any of you who've seen our presentations before know that I like to cover a little geology. Geology determines what the landforms are, the mountains, the swamps, the islands, and the landforms determine what we photograph as landscape photographers and where the wildlife is. As you can see in Alaska, there are a lot of mountain ranges, and they all tend to go either east-west, like the Brooks Range up here that separates the North Slope, which is where all the oil is, from the rest of Alaska. The ranges further south tend to curve around the Bay of Alaska. And let's take a look at why that might be, because there's a reason for the way they're formed. And you can see that the Pacific plate is thrusting under the North American plate. And there are a number of faults. One is the Denali Fault, which is partly where the Alaska Range forms. This is the Alaska Range here that comes down, and especially down here onto the Alaska Peninsula. The Fairweather Range down here in the southeast, but they curve around. This is part of the famous Ring of Fire, the volcanic perimeter of the Pacific. So Alaska has a fair number of volcanoes. This is what it looks like in a cross section. You have the Pacific plate going underneath the North American plate, and all of these areas here that are different colors are what are called accretions, areas from other continents or island ranges that are kind of glommed on over hundreds of millions of years. And you can see with the Pacific Range pushing under, it's like if you had a rug and you were a throw rug and you were pushing the end of it, it would crumple up perpendicular to the direction you're pushing. And that's why all these mountain ranges are generally perpendicular to the way the Pacific plate is pushing, crumpling up all these mountain ranges. And here, as you can see, as the Pacific plate dives down, it reaches a certain level underneath the earth where the pressure and the heat build up enough to melt the rock, and it comes up as magma and it forms volcanoes. So that's what's underlying the Alaska geology and geography, a gross oversimplification, but it will do for tonight.
So I'm just going to give a little bit about Alaska in general. So Alaska's our 49th state, as you all know. Actually came into statehood in 1959 during my lifetime. And it was bought from Russia. In general, the area, it's the territorial area is 663,000 square miles, but only 730,000 people live in that area. So compare that to like New Jersey. Alaska's like 76 times as big as New Jersey, but only has 8% of the population. And that New Jersey has. And compared to Texas, it's about 2.5 times as big as Texas, and it only has about 2.5% of the population that Texas has. So it's not vastly populated. And most people live in the corridor between Anchorage and Fairbanks, so that sort of central area, and locally along the coastline, so like down into Juneau and all these places we're showing here. The indigenous population is about 15% of the total population, and Alaska's become an ecological paradise. That's why we like going there. There's more land in preservation than any other state in the US, and it has birds, mammals, plants, marine life, glaciers, mountains. So it's quite a diverse set of landscape and geology, but also of wildlife, fauna and flora. And with all this, these islands and crenellations and things like that, it's got 34,000 miles of tidal shoreline. So we're going to go to some interesting areas, but we're going to start with two cruises that we did in 2002 and 2017, both with Lindblad Nat Geo, National Geographic, and both starting in Juneau. The trips were each a little bit different, but pretty much similar. The one in 2002 actually started in Juneau, went around these various areas that's shown here, and then eventually went south through British Columbia using the Inside Passage as much as possible, and then ending up in Seattle. And the 2017 actually started in Juneau and ended up in Sitka. Okay.
When we show you pictures from these cruises, we'll show you a couple from 2002, but back then, Becky was hardly shooting at all, maybe a point and shoot, and I was shooting slides. So it's only been in later years, that was probably our last trip where I was shooting slides, and then I converted to digital. And in about 2010, Becky picked up photography. So some of our trips since then, more and more she's been shooting. And the last couple of trips, there are really as many pictures of hers as there are of mine.
Now, this area of Southeast Alaska here, around Juneau and that area and all the Sitka and a bunch of other areas there, that area is called the Southeast Alaska. It's the wettest and the warmest area. So that's one reason people go there. And
a very maritime climate, moderated, but also moistened by the sea. So,
okay, these are the ships that we took. They, as Phil pointed out here in the notes, we have 62 passengers on this boat plus crew. And that's good because you're going to see as we go to some places only small cruise boats like this can go in. So it made it nice that we got to visit places that the larger cruise ships couldn't get to.
We're not big ship people. We've been on any number of cruises, but 100, maybe 120 passengers. And typically, in fact, I think most of the cruises we've been on have been with Lindblad and Nat Geo. This, by the way, is the same ship, 2002 and 2017, but as you can see, it got a paint job.
And then when we're on the ship, this is how you get around by these zodiacs or inflatables. And they take you to the landings. They take you out just along the water to look at the various things, like on the lower right, that we're out in the out on the water looking at the icebergs. Okay. One of the places we stopped, and I think this was outside of Ketchikan, had a totem pole, outside totem pole garden, I call it. And the totem poles were carved and painted once, and then they're left to disintegrate. And they had various meanings. There could be totem poles for potlatch. That's where you come together as a large group and share your food and and celebrate. Or it could be a memorial or a funereal. It could be one of shame. I don't know when that happens. I don't know if the one on the right here with the man in front of the fish is one of shame. Or it can be about heritage, telling a story about your heritage. Okay. You know, we totally missed Juneau, sort of. Okay. Yeah, Juneau is the capital, and there are no roads that go in and out of that connect Juneau to the North American highway system. So if you're going to go to Juneau, you fly in by plane or you go in by boat. It's larger than Rhode Island. It's the site of Alaska's first gold rush in the 1880s, and then downtown Juneau is built on the tailings from the part along the water is built on the tailings from the gold mines. But one of the best investments we did there was the Mount Roberts Tramway. And that took you up to the mountain. You could see all around and had a lovely area to do hikes in an area like that.
Once we left Juneau, our first stop was Tracy Arm. And as you can see, the scenery is spectacular. The mountains come right down to the sea. The sea is full of icebergs. For those photographers, this is from our 2017 trip, and you'll see a difference in the settings between our 2017 trip and some of our earlier trips. Here on that ISO 2000, in the early trip, 2007 that you'll see next, we didn't have as good cameras and we didn't have as much skill, so our settings were very different. But here our cameras are better. We can push the ISO up to do, to get the shutter speed and do a handheld shot.
Okay, so this is Tracy, another fishing town. As Phil says, it's right there with all these rock walls plummeting into the water. The water is more than 1,000 feet deep, and it's the face of the glaciers and the calving that you can see also in Tracy Arm and in Tracy Sound. And here's here's the glaciers that come right down to the water's edge.
They're really spectacular. With these glaciers, you get that blue color to them. I've read a half dozen different explanations of why they're blue. The oversimplification is that the ice crystals in them are very compressed because of the enormous weight and the amount of time the glacier is squeezing the ice. And as a result of the crystal structure, the other wavelengths of light are absorbed, but the blue wavelength, it's a very short wavelength, has a lot of energy, so it's reflected back.
Okay. And then in Tracy Arm and in that area, there are a lot of ice flows that, the ice and the glaciers come to the edge of the water, they calve, they make icebergs that float around. So you have seals, harbor seals like the one up on the left, hauled out on the ice, as well as some birds floating along on their iceberg. And then, so we didn't say, but in our 2002 trip, we took in September. In our 2017 trip, we took in July. And a bit different because in September, actually I'm wrong, yeah, that's right, that is right. So we stopped at Petersburg for July 4th. Petersburg is known as Little Norway because of the Norwegians who settled in the area. And actually, it also has sort of flavored some of the celebrations they do. And the 4th of July celebration in Petersburg is one of their two main celebrations. The other one is sometime earlier in spring, commemorating Norwegian Founders Day. Let me get rid of that. Okay. So here we have the folks. They really come out. They come all out for it. You may not be able to see it, but in the back you can see some guys behind the big drums in the front. There are guys on these big spindles, like logs almost, but they're spindles like from cables, like the telephone cable spindles on their side, rolling. And these guys use their feet to roll it along. Definitely a Norwegian kind of thing. Comes from the lumber rolling the lumber. And that actually was one of the games they played.
It was a lot of fun. We don't normally go on trips for that. We're mostly nature photographers, but we had a good time. And
when they're not celebrating 4th of July, Petersburg is basically a fishing town. It had water, it had fish, and it had icebergs. And back in the 1800s, icebergs were really important if you're going to actually do anything with fish, because you didn't have refrigeration. So you fished in the water, you brought it up, you used the ice that was available to help chill it and send it on then downstream or off to the other towns. They have salmon, shrimp, crab, halibut, and this is one of those towns where tourism is usually absent. The harbor isn't large enough for big ships, so we were lucky to get in there. I think we were the only ship really in there, and the people were really friendly. That was fun. So you can see it's a fishing town. On the right, we have some of the buoys and hanging on one of the sheds, and the one on the left is a reflection of one of the fishing shacks.
Near that area, we walked to a bog and just photographed some of the unusual plants. A sundew plant, one of the carnivorous plants. You don't see a lot of them. They're bog plants. Muskeg water plant. The carnivorous plants are frequently in bogs because bogs are very nitrogen poor. So the plants get their nitrogen from insects that they capture.
So they sort of have like sticky parts on those pretty little petals there.
Chatham Strait.
Okay. So Chatham Strait is part of Glacier Bay National Park. The Tungus Forest surrounds it. It's one of the largest one of the largest protected forest like that in North America. It's a great place to, well, you see the fog rolls in here, but it's also a great place to see icebergs and other things like that. This is Chatham area here, the bay there, and that really formed very quickly. When Vancouver went there in the earlier 1800s, it was icebound. You could barely get into it. But within like a lifetime, it actually opened up from, they thought probably from earthquakes making the calving of the iceberg, the glacier really calve a lot. And so that opened it up more quickly. But it was a place where we got to see orcas.
It's always fun to see orcas.
And humpback whales.
Humpback whales.
And here we have humpback whales bubble feeding or bubble net feeding. And bubble net feeding is a wonderful nature experience, I think. And it's Southeast Asia, Southeast Alaska is one of the places where it happens most frequently. Not all humpback whales bubble net feed, and it takes at least 2, usually more, whales to do it. You can see there's several on this.
There must be a half dozen or more there.
Yeah, it can be up to hundreds, but these were smaller, maybe a dozen or so. Each whale has its own role, and they're not necessarily related. It's a learned behavior, but it happens in the cold waters where you have a large amount of fish. There's a lot of nutrients coming off the glacier, so there's a lot of fish in these waters. And this is a chance for the humpbacks, who only feed half the year. When they go down to the warmer climates down in around like Hawaii and stuff to do calving and things, they don't feed. Those waters are not as fish rich as they are in the Northeast. So this is an opportunity for, like, this would be herring that they were feeding on, where one will go, they have a leader who will go find the fish, give a signal to the others, start to blow bubbles. The others start to blow bubbles. They have what they call a singer, one who's making these screeching noises. So between the screeching noises and the bubbles, which help enclose the fish, they won't go out through the bubble curtain. The fish rise to the top, and then the singer gives the clue, and you can hear it. When you hear it, when they have the hydrophones in, you can hear it, and it just goes higher and higher in pitch, and then all of a sudden they all erupt at the same time. Mouths whale agape to feed on the fish that have come up to the top.
It's quite exciting. We got a real kick, and they were doing it within 50 yards of the ship.
Well, actually, one time they did it right by the side of the ship.
That's
It was
right.
so exciting. You could see the breath.
Okay, the Indian Islands, another area in near Glacier Bay, I believe.
Right.
Just some nice shots. We were out in the Zodiac, shooting the birds and the rock formations.
And then also in that area, we saw other wildlife, including the sea otters and the pups, which is the upper one, and the Steller sea lions, which would sometimes be really curious and come up and check you out in your Zodiac.
The sea otters spend a lot of time on their backs. This one has a pup on its belly. You'll see them opening clams, while they're sitting on their backs. They use it as a breakfast table.
Yeah, they float along. And actually, we learned on another trip that there are kelp beds that they use, these giant kelp beds, and they sometimes use them as nurseries. So when the pups are young and they need to go out and fish, they'll actually sort of wrap them up in the kelp to help, stabilize them, and that's where they stay, floating along. And the parent goes out and fishes, and then comes back and then takes the babe, the pup.
Okay, Glacier Bay. As Becky mentioned earlier, it had originally been frozen just about down to its mouth. But you can see that the glaciers have receded considerably, and this is about 60 miles. So large ships can't really maneuver in here. Fortunately, our small ship could get in some of the smaller fjords, so we could get close to the glaciers. We're in Glacier Bay. That's the Fairweather Range, the mountain range behind the big glaciers. And this is an infrared shot on the left. You can see one of the glaciers coming down from the mountains. That would be a stellar sea lion, I guess.
Yes.
Wonderful, wonderful mammals. So a lot of mammals.
So they haul out, and the guy on the top of the rock, the king of the hill there, he's one of the bulls, it looks like. He's a big guy, so he'll fight for his space. When it's breeding time, at least, he'll fight for his space for his female harem.
Because we took this initial cruise, and you can see that it was down here in Southeast Alaska in 2002, we really enjoyed it, but we decided that was just an appetizer. We wanted a real land experience. So our next trip was a 3-week birding trip. And we were originally birders before we were photographers. So this is Anchorage at the end of Cook Inlet, and that was our hub. So we flew into Anchorage, then we went up and spent 4 or 5 days in Denali. We drove up there, the whole group of us, drove back down to Anchorage, and we drove down to Seward, where we went to the aquarium and went out on a boat trip. Then we went back to Anchorage. Then we flew up to Nome, which is almost at the Arctic Circle. And we spent, 4 or 5 days there. Then we flew back to Anchorage. And then finally we flew out to St. Paul Island, one of the Pribilof Islands, 300 miles out in the Bering Sea, which was quite an experience. And we'll tell you a little more about that when we get there. So this was mostly a birding trip. And it was 2007, so as I mentioned, our photography skills and our camera equipment were not nearly as good.
And this is primarily all in what people would call Central Alaska. So this is sort of the central part.
With the exception, of course, of St. Paul Island.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what section it falls in.
It's maritime.
Okay. This is downtown Anchorage. The mountains you see back in the back are the Chugach, right? And on the right is the floatplane lake, where the float planes land. So that's part of the airport, actually.
We, they fly a lot of float planes there. The road system is not extensive, and so anyone who wants to get anywhere has a small plane. And many of the people get pilot's licenses in their teens, just like we get driver's license.
So Anchorage, probably about 40 to 50% of the population lives in and around Anchorage. And so it's in Central Alaska, where it's colder and drier than in the Southeast. That's probably about all I really have to say about Anchorage. It's also where a lot of the oil companies are based, big oil business.
A lot of bird photography, and you can see for those photographers in the audience, this was an older camera. So whereas in the other camera, I would push it up to 800, 1,000, even 2,000 ISO. Here I'm shooting at 400, which was the most I could get without getting too much noise, and hand holding a boreal chickadee shot at a 250th of a second. I would never do that now, nor would Becky, but we were back then.
And a boreal owl.
Boreal owl, nice owl to see. That's a captive. It wasn't out in the wild.
Then up near the fishery, we went to the fish hatchery, and that was actually a fun place to visit. It's interesting to see all the different kinds of salmon and trout that they have. And then outside, it has a race, a water run, and there we found the American dipper catching insects.
We're up in Denali, and you really can't drive yourself in Denali National Park. You have to take the bus. So here I am getting on the bus, and there Becky is practicing her mushing at one of the
stops. They
right.
had a dog sled demonstration, and Denali. This area is between. Well, Denali means the high one. It's the tallest peak in North America. Well, why don't we go to the next page to see something? Oh, we have bears. Oh, wait.
Great. When we were on the bus, we shot out of the bus window, and grizzly bear, they're brown bears. you'll see plenty of coastal brown bears, which are ones, kind of a race of them along the coast, a little bit different coloration. But these are grizzlies as well.
Then we had the alpine area. So this was probably, this was all in June time frame, this trip, the 3-week trip. So this was more or less springtime. So we have springtime flowers with the mountain in the distance. I believe this might be Denali.
Might be Denali. That's probably the Alaska Range, which goes all the way down into the beginning of the Aleutian Peninsula. And you'll see when we get to Silver Salmon Lake, Silver Salmon Creek in Lake Clark National Park, that we're still in that same mountain range.
And the other thing about Denali is that it's high enough, and it's between the Yukon Arctic. It's in that range that separates the Yukon Arctic highs and the North Pacific lows. So it's able to make its own weather. Oh.
On the road back to Anchorage, and there is probably, if not Denali, it's certainly the Alaska Range in the background.
This is the bird watcher. As you can see, it's cool. We're there in early June, early to mid-June, so we're dressed warmly.
Now we're on our way to Seward, down to the end of the peninsula. Stopped at the Seward Aquarium.
This was our chance to take some of the things we may not be able to shoot when we were out on the water.
Harlequin duck. In New Jersey, of course, in the winter, you can shoot them at the Barnegat Lighthouse. Harbor seal.
And if you look closely, he's swimming upside down.
That's right. The boat trip out of Seward. We didn't do a lot of photography on that, in part because I got seasick. It was rough. We were bouncing around.
And it was blowing.
It was blowing, so we got a few shots, but not as many as I normally would.
But we got a nice shot of a glacier coming down to the water on the right.
That's right. That's
and
right.
A nice waterfall. And when we flew to and from Nome, it was a chance, a smaller plane, well, actually it's still a jet, but it was still a chance for us to do some shots out of the window. So some area shots. So the one on the left is Denali rising through the clouds, so from above. And then
the glacial ice field on the right forming, you can see the glacier itself flowing down.
Really, that demonstrates really how much they move and how much they flow. They're really like rivers of ice.
That's right.
And here we are in Nome. Nome is above the tundra, so we don't have many trees here. Made it tough when you're out there and you needed the green room. But in any case, so this is some of the stuff where you're welcome to Nome. We have some statues there. And on the right is Phil standing by the fire hydrant. Now the fire hydrant, you might say, why the heck would you have a fire hydrant that's so high? Well, because of the snow. So in the winter, the fire hydrant won't be buried under the snow.
They get a lot of snow in the winter.
And it stays, that's the problem. They don't get a whole lot, but it stays, so it accumulates. And Nome has, outside of a little bit of a town, it's very wide open tundra. And then there's a lot of fishing and fishing shacks. And on the right of the fishing shack is the drying rack where you dry your fish. They also had a lot of sled dogs.
Yeah, they breed sled dogs. They run sled dogs. Running sleds is a big pastime up there. The Iditarod starts in Anchorage.
And it goes to Nome. It's about it's over 1,000-mile run. And it commemorates the 1925 serum run where they were taking medicine to diphtheria-stricken Nome.
Some musk oxen, some reindeer, some of the local mammals.
Which you get up there on the tundra.
Okay. Now we're going out to the Pribilof Islands. And I have to tell you, if you're interested in 5-star accommodations, you don't go there. We stayed in a place that was kind of like a barracks attached to the airport. And, it was rustic. We ate in a little self-service cafeteria attached to that barracks. But
it was like one of 2 places that you could stay.
That's right. There was a B&B. We didn't go there, but, our group stayed in the barracks.
So that also meant, although Phil and I had a room together, we had separate bathrooms. We didn't have ensuite bathrooms. In the bathrooms there was a women's bathroom and a men's bathroom. So we had a plan ahead.
But you go there for the birds. I mean, you're out in the middle of the Bering Sea. Some birds from Asia and from Russia fly over here and are found in these islands. The topography is very rugged. There are a lot of cliffs that go right down to the sea. So they get hundreds of thousands of nesting seabirds, which is just spectacular to photograph. They get a lot of fog as well. We weren't sure we'd be able to fly out on time.
Well, we didn't. Well, we didn't for two reasons. The reason we didn't fly out, one was we needed there was a broken part on the plane that had come in. And so they needed a replacement part, but the replacement part couldn't get in because of the weather. So eventually the replacement part got in, but we went out the day after.
I'd forgotten.
Yeah, we actually did. We had to reschedule our flight. And so, yes, so it was a very interesting place to stay, but the wildlife was wonderful. Actually, Phil and I think in Nome, we actually both got our 500 species of North American birds.
500 North American birds.
So this was quite a great, so you got birds, fur seals, Arctic foxes. So we're going to see some of those things. Oh, first we got to show you those three guys up on there. There are three guides. There are guides, and you know, you got a lot of light. It's June, so there's a lot of daylight here, and they would tag team us. You know, one would take us out in the morning, one would take us out in the afternoon, and one would take you out in the evening.
And we'd be exhausted, exhausted.
I remember saying one night, I can't do it anymore. I got to go rest or sleep or something. The middle one shows the cliffs, and there's it looks like common birds along the sides of the cliffs. So this is where a lot of the birds nest on the cliffs because it's a little safer, makes it harder for the Arctic fox to get to them. And then up on the hilltop, you can see in the back, you see the people with their cameras and stuff. And then the one on the right is Phil shooting down at the birds on the cliff and some folks at the top. It took quite a hike to get up there, as I remember.
It did.
But we had some nice species, the rock sandpiper bathing.
These are all new species for us. Redneck phalarope in breeding plumage.
That was unusual for us.
Yeah, I mean, occasionally you'll see a phalarope in New Jersey migrate through, but not usually in breeding plumage. Rock sandpipers is certainly not something we would see on the East Coast.
The climate here is considered polar because it's influenced by the water of the Bering Sea. And it's really considered polar mostly due to its cold summers. Its winters aren't that drastically different, but its summers are cold. And there are only about 532 people who live here, but only 457 are Alaska natives. They're Aleuts. And most of the people are doing crabbing, like the king crab, and they work in the boat yards. So here we got some horn puffin on the left.
Really great birds. And you can see again for the photographers, I'm at ISO 200. Nowadays, I would have been shooting at ISO 800, and I would never be at 100th of a second. I would have had a much faster shutter speed.
It's good though. It's good that puffin doesn't go too fast.
That's right.
And it's a horn puffin because I might have called it a tufted. It's a horn because of that thing right coming up out of its eye.
Parakeet auklets. These are just great birds. I mean, it was so exciting for us as birders to be able to see these birds.
All these seabirds. Now here's the tufted puffin.
Yeah, gorgeous bird. I mean, look at that beak. Unbelievable. Another shot of horned puffin.
And then we had the fur seals. It was a small landing beach, and the fur seals were quite active. I guess had the females just arrived, or they were waiting for the females to arrive? They were waiting for the females to arrive. So all the males were on the beach fighting it out for territory. You know, the bulls were fighting it out. It was vicious. So it wasn't a place. They actually had blinds set up so you could watch this. And then the Arctic fox. Some of them had mange, but I think he's okay.
He looks okay. They turn white in the winter, of course. Back to Anchorage.
This is like 11:30 at night. So this would have been mid-June now, or maybe the third week in June by the time we got back. to Anchorage. And so we went for a sunset shot.
That's right. And that's the end of our 3-week trip. And now we're going to Silver Salmon Creek. 2 trips, 2012, 2014. And we go there for the bears.
And each trip is about a week. I think 5 or 6 days at the lodge at Silver Salmon Creek, and a day or 2 getting in and out of Anchorage.
And you can see here's Anchorage, whoops. And it's about an hour's flight in a small plane down to Silver Salmon Creek. You land right on the beach, on the sand.
So this is another place where the way-in is either by a plane, landing on the beach, or on the dirt road, or by boat.
And our friend David, who lives in our community and may well be on this Zoom session, is the ringleader. He organized both trips, working with the lodge. And this is a group of all our photo buddies, most from one of our photo clubs, along with a couple of other old friends that we've had for many years. And 2 trips that David organized. He's organized more than that, but we've been on 2 with him. We flew in on this small plane, and you can see it's not exactly new, held together by duct tape. And I flew it in. I mean, I've never flown before, but I watched a couple of YouTubes the night before, and I figured it couldn't be too hard.
At least you did stay at the Holiday Inn Express.
That's right. But in any event, I was in the co-pilot seat, which was really a lot of fun because I could see everything out the front window and take some pictures, like these. And you know, it was a gorgeous flight in. You're flying low. You're flying right over all the small lakes and the scenery. You're very close to everything.
You can see how wet Alaska is. Now here we are out in the mud flats. We'd go out in the morning, we'd go out in the afternoon or the evening. What they would do is people would, there are 2 lodges on this lake, this area of Cook Inlet. And they keep in touch with each other about what they're seeing. And there are a lot of fishermen also. So this area was really prevalent for fishermen. And the photo tourism has started up for the last several years, many years.
You can see how close we get to the bears.
Actually, how close the bears get to us. We don't really approach them, but they will approach us.
That's right. And this is our guide, the tall fellow there. He knows all the bears. If they get too close, he'll, tell us remain silent, and they'll walk by us generally.
Stay together, remain silent.
This is the lodge. Whoops, come back.
The white building is the
main lodge.
The main lodge. The building to the right of it, they have a day lodge, and then their house is farther to the right. They have a garden in the back where they grow some stuff, some of the vegetables. We ate wonderful food. They had a license to do some fish netting, and boy, one time we just kept asking, more fresh salmon, please. But one time we had halibut. It was wonderful. They had a wonderful chef.
In this infrared shot, you can see here's the lodge. The tides were very high. They come all the way up to this little dirt road. The dirt road doesn't connect to any road system. It's just a small dirt road, that goes for maybe a mile or so in front of the couple of lodges.
And some fishing houses.
And the owner of this lodge has a small airplane. And if he needs groceries, he gets in his airplane, uses this dirt road as his runway, takes off and flies to one of the towns nearby that has a supermarket and goes food shopping.
Unfortunately, when we were there, as Phil said, the tide came up and actually crossed the road. It came up to the front, just about the front of the building. At least it crossed the whole road. So planes weren't flying in and out. You couldn't land on the beach if it was already this flooded, and you couldn't land on that dirt road. So it turns out the owner and his wife were across the way picking up some supplies or doing stuff, but they couldn't get back right away until it receded. So the upper left, they're cleaning. This is our guide cleaning the fish they caught, which we're going to have for dinner.
Because they clean the fish at that shack, the bears come. They can smell the fish. Here's a cub
No, that's a mom.
Is that the mom?
That was the mom.
Okay. And, you know, they come right up, right to the lodge.
They discourage them from coming, and they don't feed them. But as soon as he brings out that fish and starts to clean it, they smell it on the air. They come. They're over by they're across the wetland there, and then they come across and some, you know, partially swimming with the cubs.
They can be a mile away, but they'll smell that
They'll
salmon.
smell them, they'll come. This is a cub. Okay, the hose turns out to be a great play toy. I mean, you know, sink your teeth into that. They said they had a lot of hose replacements and taping up of the hoses for the garden.
This is how we got around, an ATV carrying us in these trailers. And you can see you get very close to the bear.
This was one in the lodge, a stuffed one.
The stuffed one in the lodge, right?
Yeah, well, okay, so the one on the left really should have come later. This is me. You can't tell it's me, but this is me being escorted. We're about to leave, and of course, all our stuff and us have to be ferried across the river there, the little inlet, and across the mud. And the mud is the really thick stuff that sucks your boots off. And you see Phil walking across some of the water with probably with mud underneath.
Yeah, it was, I don't look like I'm having fun, but I swear I really enjoyed it.
But the reason he's helping me and everybody was taking pictures, because before this, not the same day, we went out one day and we had to cross the mud. And they were having a trainee, a guide, and she led us across this mud flat, which had like water, but it had this mud that would suck your boots off. And I fell 3 times in it. I mean, I fell 3 times till I finally, somebody came.
You can see the results of that. Becky's covered with mud, and on the right, our friend David is hosing her off later back at the lodge, but she saved her camera.
First of all, I was glad it was in its rain gear, but I didn't, yes, the camera and the tripod did not go in the water with me. I'm holding onto my tripod as you can see, I was kneeling in the mud. I should have just gone and rolled around in the inlet.
My friend David took that picture. I had the wrong lens on to shoot that. I was so sorry that I didn't have a short lens on to take a shot like that.
It's amazing where the mud can go.
Yes. The area around the lodge is just gorgeous. Trees, open marshes. However, bear in mind with marshes, you get mosquitoes. And we went out, you know, at sunset a couple times to try and shoot the sunset. And I'll tell you, it was really challenging. We were blood donors.
But here are more pictures now of the bears. This was the one on the upper left. It's an overcast day. So I was talking to my photo buddies, all more experienced than I, and said, "What do we do on a photo on this? We can't get enough light to shoot fast." They said, "Oh, well, then this is the time where you shoot slower and try to get some motion blurs, a pan blur." So that's my attempt at a pan blur of a running bear.
This is Slope Mountain in the background. It's in the same mountain range, the Alaska range, as Denali that comes down to this area. And a coastal brown bear. The bears are just great. The scenery is spectacular. It's a wonderful place to be.
So that bear is actually fishing. The one thing about this lodge in this area, if you go there in July, you get a lot more cubs. The cubs are young. But the bears are clamming on the shore, and you'll see some pictures of that. They're eating grass, or they're going for the blueberries. And then when August comes, finally, that's when the salmon start coming up. And this bear is actually fishing. She's watching for fish in the river. And this bear is out there to fish. Well,
that one caught a fish. And most of their attempts, by the way, are failures. Maybe 1 out of every 8 or 9 attempts, they actually catch a salmon. So you watch them running a lot and splashing around.
Okay, this standing up posture is another way to look for fish. This is to get a better view of what's happening around them. And the one on the right is clamming. Okay, so they dig up a clam, and then they use those big paws to squish it so they can open the clam, and then suck out the meat. We have a couple bears, just looking at us. And this cub was pretty cool.
Yeah, cub on the right. In fact, when we were photographing the cub, I think is when it was muddy and Becky took her mud bath.
Oh, yeah, yeah, that was the day. That was the time. Here you can see them in the grasses. The one up in the left is eating grass, and the one on the right's just coming through the grass.
By the way, the bears in this area are pretty habituated to people. They get a lot of visitors photographing them. They get fishermen in Silver Salmon Creek. So since we don't look like salmon, for the most part, they ignore us.
And by this time, the male bears have all gone up into the mountain to fish for the salmon, up into the hills. So the moms and the cubs are left below.
So these are all females, adult females plus cubs.
Right. And actually, these bears, you sort of know. The one up I think the one up in the top left is Pavlov, and I can always tell she had a nice round head and nice little round ears. And the one down on the right is Looper or one of Looper's relatives, because Looper was very white blonde and had that long snout. That's a Looper cub. She had twins, and this cub's now probably 2.5, almost 3 years old, and this was the first year the twins were away from their mom.
You know, it's fun to go to this lodge. They treat you well. They have good guides. You only have to unpack once, and which when you're carrying a lot of gear, camera gear, is very nice. And all these bears are within a mile or two of the lodge, and so it's very accessible. And that is the end of our PowerPoint program. And as is typical, I have a very short 4-minute slideshow set to music. So let me boot that up, if I can get it. And here we go. Okay, so let's see if I can get my screen back.
You want to stop sharing? Maybe not.
Just let's see, let me stop sharing.
Okay.
Phil
Good.
and Becky, that was a wonderful trip. I thank you very much, and the photographs just beautiful. People, if you do have questions out there, there's the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and you can just type them in, and we'll try to pull them up and get asked. I know someone asked earlier. Let me see if I can find that one. Somebody wanted to know, like, where you stayed at some of the places. Maybe, I know you talked about the one.
Yeah. When we when we were in Anchorage, we would just stay at a hotel, and there were a couple of them actually not far from the airport, and they're reasonable. And then there's restaurants around there, so you don't actually have to have a car unless you want to go out and explore on your own. When we were in Juneau, we stayed in one restaurant, one hotel in downtown Juneau, and then we went. And when we were on the ship, obviously we stayed on the ship.
Okay.
We got off and visited different areas. Let's see. When we were with Forrest and we were doing the birding, we started out in Anchorage in a hotel. We always stayed in some kind of hotel or lodge. When we went up to Denali, we stayed right outside the park. There was a lodge there right outside the park. Since to stay in the park was really expensive, and I think primarily it was like the Princess Cruises took over most of the hotel. So we didn't do that.
We don't camp.
We didn't camp.
You don't camp.
And then when we were, as we said, when we were out on the Pribilofs, we stayed at the hotel.
I wouldn't call it a real hotel, but
whatever.
It was
the lodging that's right attached to the airport. So you have your lodging, you have your food, you have a cafeteria food there. And basically the guides that we had, they were the ones who took us around. They had vans because we couldn't bring a van out there. One thing that was good though, when we did go to Denali, our leader, he had brought his own van up there. So we were using his vehicle because a lot of the rental vehicles will not allow you to go on the dirt roads outside of Denali. And there's a wonderful road outside of Denali where there's great wildlife, but at that time at least it was not paved. When we were down in Stewart, I'm sure we stayed in a hotel.
We have a question. Did we use the Alaska Marine Highway for some of our trips? Since I don't know what that is, I don't know whether we used it or not. If by that do you mean did we use some of the ferries that go up and down the Inside Passage? The answer is no. We went with this tour company, Lindblad or National Geographic, and we were on their boat the whole time.
Although I understand from a lot of people that that is one way to go, particularly with the ferry system. Bring your car, get on the ferry, take you from one place to the other, it helps you get around.
Do we print our photos? Yes, we do print them, and we have some shows. Normally, in the summer, we would be having a show up at the New Jersey Audubon Center in Bernardsville, but of course, given the current situation, that's not the case. What tour group each time?
Okay, as Phil said, the boat trips were with Lindblad Expeditions or Lindblad and National Geographic. When we went out to the lodge at Lake Clark, the Alaska Homestead Lodge, again, we went with our own group. Our friend David DeRoche set it up, but he organized it with the lodge. So we basically were taking over the lodge, I think, both times we went.
The name of the lodge outside Denali. You know, I don't
remember the name.
That was 13 years ago.
But it might have changed for all I know. I know it was not, it was half decent. It was good. It was clean.
When is the best time of year to go to Alaska? It depends what you want to see.
Yeah, like for instance, when we went in early June, we went because that's when the birds are very active. They're still courting. They haven't settled down in all their nests, because when they start nesting in late June and July, a lot of them aren't very active, and they're secretive because now they have young. So you wouldn't go then. So early June was good. The other reason for going early June was you also had less tourism because the schools weren't out yet, so the families weren't coming to the area.
But if you want to see the northern lights, you have to go up there and freeze in the middle of the winter. So it all depends what you want to see in photograph.
Right, so if you, that's true. Again, I don't know if I said this, but even in the late 1990s, early 2000s, Alaska was becoming very popular as an ecotourist place. And they were getting over 1 million people then of tourists. So that was even more than their standard population, their normal population. So if you go in the summer, you will run into a lot more people just because a lot of people have vacations then, and including families. And it's a big family destination. It's great for kids as well as adults.
Can we speak to the retreat of the glaciers between the time we first visited in 2002 and 2017? You know, that's tough. We
can't really talk about them here. We've noticed it certainly in Iceland,
that's true.
where the first time we went to Iceland was
1993, I think.
1993. And you actually fjorded a little stream and you went up and you could touch the edge of one of the glaciers and you could see all the tourmaline at the big rocks stuck in it and stuff like that face. Now, when we went back, let's say
Several years ago.
5, 7 years ago, within the last 5 years, to get to the glaciers, like to get to the places where they have the ice caves. So that's under the glacier. That's a cave into where the outflow of water melting from the glacier comes out. We had to drive in a big, huge tired vehicle for well over a half hour.
Yeah,
I mean, so it has,
miles,
you know,
yeah.
so we were driving miles. So you can see it, but
It's difficult to know here because most of the glaciers we saw come down to the water.
Right.
So we don't really have a frame of reference. They're not on lands where we could see, here's where they were the first time that we could hike up to, and here's where they are now. We went up to them the first time in a boat, and the second time we went up to them in a boat. So it's more difficult to determine. How much would these tours cost? I don't have a clue.
But we know the Lindblad tours are much more expensive than most of the others.
Small boats, you don't get the economies of scale that you get in these 2,000 passenger ships. So, but you can get places you wouldn't go otherwise, and you have a lot more access.
And you get, you know, you get the naturalist with it, you get all the talks and all the education that goes with it. When we went with David, we didn't pay overhead, but we had we had the stay at a hotel in Anchorage, at least coming and going one night. We had the flight. That was somewhat expensive, so it was good that we had people to share it with. We had a full plane, and of course then the lodge. Now the lodge can't be. I don't know that it's that expensive, but you get your guides with the lodge, and you get all your food as well as your accommodations. And of course, it's almost like island economy in that they have to bring in most of the food. Well, that's not true. I mean, the fish they're getting there, and they're growing some of their vegetables. But you know, most other things they got to bring in.
How long does it take to edit your photos and put together a presentation like this? Well, the editing photos, of course, we do as we go along. We edit them. We bring laptops on trip. We edit them on the trips. We edit them when we get home. So, you know, we're always editing pictures. Once they're edited, putting together a presentation like this takes a good couple of days. You know, I mean, I do most of the putting together of the programs, although it's both of our photos, and it takes me probably 2 solid days of work to put this together.
And it took me a good day of going, you know, like an 8-hour day of going back over notes and actually researching some of the information that we wanted to present.
I think that is all the questions.
That's it. Well, we thank you for doing that time of doing that, because we are the benefit of these wonderful presentations. So I thank everyone for joining us tonight for another, as I said, wonderful presentation. Phil and Becky, I want to thank you again. They will be back with us next one is October, and I believe we're going to Ecuador.
We do Ecuador in October.
So I thank you all for joining us. Bernards Township Library virtual event. See you soon.
Bye-bye now.
Night, everyone.